Dower and Maintenance, Part 1. One of the oldest customs in the relationships within the human family is that man has acknowledged the rights of the woman to a dower, mahr, on the occasion of marriage. He used to pay something of value to the woman or to her father. Moreover, he was responsible, during the whole period of marriage, for the maintenance and upkeep, nafaka, of his wife and children. What is the origin of this custom? Why and how did it come into existence? What form does the dower take? Why should the husband pay for the maintenance of the wife? If it is agreed that both the husband and the wife should abide by their natural and human rights, that absolutely just and humane relations should subsist between them, and that man should live with woman entirely in his capacity as a human being, is there any justification for dower and maintenance? Or are dower and maintenance handed down as a remnant from those ages when woman used to be the property of man? Should dower and maintenance be abolished, according to the demands of justice and equality of human rights, especially in the 20th century? So that marriages take place without the right to dower and maintenance, and should woman bear her own financial requirements, and also share equally in defraying the expenses arising from the children? We begin our chapter with the topic of the dower. We shall see how the dower came into existence and what its purpose was, and how sociologists have interpreted its coming into existence. 1. A short history of the dower. Sociologists say that in prehistoric times human beings led a savage life, lived in tribal groups, and that, for unknown reasons, marriage among blood relations used to be considered taboo. The young men of the tribe who wished to marry were obliged to make the selection of their spouses and lovers from other tribes, and for that purpose they had to approach the other tribes to make this choice. In those ages man was not aware of the part he played in the birth of a child. In other words, he did not know that his intercourse with a woman was effective in bringing about the birth of a child. He considered children to be the children of his wife and not his own. Despite the fact that he could see the likeness of his features in the children, he could not understand the reason for that likeness. Consequently, men used to consider children, as well as themselves, the children of women. The lineage was constructed by reference to mothers, and not by reference to fathers. Men were considered barren and unproductive, and after marriage, they lived in the tribe of the woman like parasites, and the woman needed him only for his company and his physical strength. This period, according to sociologists, is known as the matriarchal period. It was not long before man came to know of his part in the birth of children and identified himself as the real person to whom his children were to be attributed. From that time on, he brought woman under his control, and took the position of the head of the family. The patriarchal period, as it is called, began. In that age, too, marriage between blood relations was not considered admissible, and man was obliged to select his spouse from some other tribe and bring her to his own tribe. As there was always a state of conflict and hostility among tribes, the selection of spouse was by means of abduction. In other words, a young man abducted the girl of his choice from another tribe. Gradually, peace instead of hostility reigned, and the different tribes could peacefully live together. At that point the custom of abduction became unnecessary, and in order to get the girl of his choice man used to bind himself to the service of the father of the girl, and in lieu of the services rendered by the would-be son-in-law, the father of the girl gave his daughter to him, and then he would bring that girl to his tribe. Eventually the economic situation improved, and man reached the conclusion that, instead of working for years for the father of the bride, it was preferable to present a worthy gift to him at the time of marriage, and thus obtain his daughter from him. He began to do this, and from here the dower came into existence. Thus, according to the sociologist, in the first period, man lived as a parasite and as an attendant on woman. In that period the woman used to rule over the man. In the subsequent period, when the power fell into the hands of man, he abducted the woman from her tribe. In the third period, in order to obtain the woman of his choice, man used to go to the father of the woman and work several years for him. In the fourth period, man paid an amount of money as a present to the father of the woman, and from here, the custom of the dower began. They say that from the time mankind dropped the matriarchal system and adopted the patriarchal one, man made a woman his slave, or at least his servant or laborer, and looked on her as an economic tool which might occasionally satisfy his passion also, he did not give her any social or economic independence. The product of her labor was meant for others, namely, the father or the husband. Woman had no right to select a husband for herself or to commence on her own initiative, or for her own profit, any business for economic or financial amelioration. As a matter of fact, they say, the money that man paid her as a dower, and the money he spent for her maintenance, was in lieu of the economic gain that he derived during the period of his marriage to her. 2. The dower in the Islamic system of rights. There is also a fifth period, about which sociologists and theory makers are silent. This is the period in which man, on the occasion of the marriage, presents a gift to the woman herself. Neither of the presents has any share or right in that gift. No sooner does the woman receive that present from the man, than she attains her social and economic independence. Firstly, she makes the selection of her husband by her own free will, and not in compliance with the will of her father or brother. Secondly, as long as she is in the house of her father, and, likewise, as long as she is with her husband, no one has the right to exploit her for his own benefit. The profits from her work and toil are for herself, and in the matter of her rights she does not need the guardianship of man. Man, as far as exploiting is concerned, only has the right to sexual intercourse with woman in the period in which she is his wife, and as long as the marriage lasts, and man has sexual relations with her, he is responsible for arranging the comforts of life for her, as far as his means allow him. This period is the very period which Islam acknowledges, and it has laid the structure of marriage on this foundation. There are a number of verses in the Quran ordaining that the woman's dower belongs to her and not to anybody else, and that for the duration of the marriage too, man should be responsible for defraying the expenses of the maintenance of his wife. Moreover, any profit that a woman earns by way returns for her work is her own income and not anybody else's, whether father or husband. It is now that the question of dower and maintenance becomes a bit of a puzzle. 4. When the dower used to belong to the father of the girl, and the girl used to go as a slave to the house of her husband, and the husband used to exploit her, the reason for the dower was in consideration of the purchase of the girl from her father. Besides that, the justification for maintenance was that every master has to bear the expenses of his slave. When it was resolved that nothing was to be given over to the father of the girl, and that the husband had no right to exploit her and derive any economic benefit from her, and that woman was economically independent, and that this independence was to such an extent that, as far as rights were concerned, she was not in need of the guardianship, permission, and supervision of her husband, why, then, should there be a payment of dower, and an arrangement for her maintenance? 3. A look at history. If we want to understand the philosophy of dower and maintenance in the fifth period, it is necessary to divert our attention for a while to the 4 periods that were listed previously. As a matter of fact, whatever is said on this matter is only a series of suppositions and guesses. These are neither realities of history, nor scientific facts derived from experiment. A few ideas brought together here and a few philosophical assumptions about man and the universe there. And these suppositions and guesses come into existence. We should not be too much of a hurry to believe all that is said about the matriarchal period, as they call it, nor all the things that are said about the selling of daughters by their fathers and the exploitation of women by their husbands. In their suppositions and guesses, 2 things are especially noticeable. Firstly, an effort is made to interpret the early history of mankind as extraordinary crude and devoid of all human sentiments. The other thing is that nature, which always functions with wonderful planning to reach its objective, is totally ignored. This kind of interpretation and theory about mankind and nature is acceptable to a person in the West, but for a person in the East, provided he is not under the spell of the West, it has no value. Because of certain special reasons, a Western liberal individual does not have a good understanding of human sentiments. So naturally he cannot believe that the spark of human feeling and the warmth of emotion play a basic role in human history. A typical Western characteristic way of thinking is that when he gets up from the economic side of his bed, in other words, when he sees history from the economic angle, he sees bread alone. Then, in his eyes, history is a machine, and will not budge unless you give it nourishment. When he sees human affairs in terms of sex, humanity, and the history of mankind with all its literary, artistic, moral and religious facets and manifestations of glory and intellectual splendor is nothing but the play of sublimated sexual forms. 1 Likewise, if he looks at things in terms of domination and gaining the upper hand, the adventures of mankind seem to be entirely a tale of bloodshed and cruelty. In the Middle Ages, the people of the West saw torture in religion, and in the name of religion they experienced atrocious persecution, and witnessed cases of people being burnt alive. That is why they are afraid of the name of God, of religion, and everything associated with it. So despite the fact that they see abundant signs and clear, verified indications of metaphysical purposes that the universe is not left to take care of itself, Westerners rarely venture to acknowledge the real final cause. We do not ask these interpreters to believe in the existence of the prophets, who appeared throughout history, expounded and heralded justice and integrity, campaigned against deviation, and suffered for the success of those campaigns. We only wish them not to pass by and ignore the conscious role of nature. There is no doubt that, in the history of the relations of women and men, excessive cruelties and innumerable atrocities have been chronicled. The Quran has narrated the most horrible of them. But still, it cannot be said that the entire history of these relations has been one of cruelty and barbarity. 4. The real philosophy of the dower. We believe that the introduction of the dower is the result of a very wise plan which is employed in the context of creation to keep a balance in the relations of men and women and to keep them united. The dower has its basis in the fact that the way of loving of man and woman is different in each of them within the scheme of creation. Those who are spiritually enlightened believe his law to be transmitted throughout all existence. They say that the law of love, the bond of affection, attraction, and attractiveness dominates all creatures and all things that exist, with the peculiarity that all creatures and all things that exist are different in so far as every creature has to fulfill a particular role. Thus an earnest longing in one and a calm indifference in the other is the way things are. The famous Iranian poet, Fakhruddin Iraqi too wrote, "Who knows what the ecstatic harp of love is whose plectrum sets the 9 heavens spinning? There is a secret behind the veil, if you knew it. You would understand behind which allegory reality is to be founded. It is love which at every instant colors everything else, in one place, glory, in another submission and need. Whoever comes as the lover burns with ardor, whoever is dressed as the beloved waits with patience." In connection with the chapter where we stated the differences between man and woman, we said that the natures of the feelings man and woman have towards each other are not alike. The law of creation has ordained beauty, dignity, and an element of indifference on the art of woman and neediness, beseeching, love and serenading on the part of man. The bodily weakness of woman has thus been harmonized with the physical strength of man, and this very thing has caused man to always take the initiative in asking woman's hand in marriage. We have seen before that, according to the version of the sociologists, it was always man who went out in search of woman, even in the matriarchal and patriarchal periods. Scholars say that man is more sensual than woman. In Islamic traditions it is narrated that man is not more sensual than woman, rather, it is exactly the other way round. However, woman is created with more self-control against her passion, more strength of will. The result of both is the same: man is weaker than woman in controlling his instincts. This peculiarity has always given the woman the opportunity not to pursue the man and not to hand herself over to him so easily. On the contrary, she has always forced the man to court her, and to take steps to win her over. As one of the first steps to seeking her pleasure, and as token of respect for her acceptance, a gift was given to her. Why is it that individuals of the male sex were competing, disputing and fighting amongst themselves for the hand of a female, and why it is the individuals of the female sex never showed any signs of desire or impatience to take possession of the male sex? It is for the very reason that the roles ascribed to the male and the female sexes are not the same. It has always been the role of the male and not of the female to be the one who asks, and the female sex has never, with any ardent desire, restlessly pursued the male sex. She has always shown herself to be unconcerned and indifferent. Dower is connected with the modesty and chastity of a woman. Woman has been made instinctively aware that it is necessary for her honor and respect that she should not give herself up freely to the authority of man, but should give her self-worth. These are the reasons that made it possible for her, in spite of all her physical weaknesses, to draw man to her threshold, and compel men to compete with each other. By withholding herself from the reach of man, she created romance. So many Majnuns are made to run after their Laylas 3, and when she entrusts her body in marriage to man, she accepts a present and a gift from the man as a token of his sincerity. It is said that in some savage tribes, girls who were sought after by several restless suitors and lovers used to persuade them to duel between themselves. The one who defeated or killed his rival used to get the girl. Some time ago, the daily newspapers in Tehran wrote that some girl had suggested to two boys, her lovers, that they should duel here in Tehran. Before her eyes, they fell upon one another with knives. For those persons who consider power to be limited to only physical strength, and consider the history of the relations of women and men to be entirely a story of cruelty and exploitation by man, it is unbelievable that woman, a weak, delicate being, has the power to throw members of the strong and powerful sex against one another. Nevertheless, if someone has just a little insight into the skillful plan of creation and the wonderful hidden power that was invented in the being of woman, he will be aware that these things are not strange. Woman has had a great deal of influence over man. The influence of woman over man has been greater than man's influence over woman. In most of his feats, his bravery, heroism, ingeniousness, and individual characteristics, man is indebted to woman and her delicate self-control, indebted to woman's modesty and purity, indebted to her attractiveness. Woman has always built man, and man society. When the modesty, purity, and self-control of woman disappear, and woman aspires to play the part of man, man will first of all eat away the dower of woman, then man will forget his manliness, and society will be destroyed. The same female power, by which she could keep her dignity throughout the long ages of history, by not pursuing man, by which she could draw him to seek for her at her threshold, by which she could make men fight in rivalry with each other for her hand, by which she could drive men to the degree of killing each other, by which she could guard her modesty and chastity and could keep her body covered from the eyes of man, by which she could display herself as something mysterious, by which she could be a source of inspiration to man and an instigator of man's feelings of love, by which she could be the motivation of his skills, the inspirer of his valor and ingeniousness, and by which she could create in him such emotions as to make him sing her praise in songs of love and adoration and reduce himself to humility, humbleness, and insignificance before her. This same power impels man to present her, on the occasion of marriage, with what is called a dower. The dower is one of the articles of a general character of traditions, the foundation of which is established in creation itself, and has been provided by nature. 5. Dower as in the Quran. The Quran did not introduce and devise the dower in the form we spoke of above in discussing the fifth stage. The reason is that the dower in this form was invented by natural creation. The only work the Quran did was to restore the dower to its natural form. The Holy Quran, with unrivaled fineness and sensitivity, says, "And give the women their dower as a gift graciously, 4:4. That is, the women's dowers which belong to themselves, and not to their fathers or brothers, and are gifts and presents from you to them, are to be given to them." The Quran has referred to three basic points in this verse. Firstly, dower is referred to as sadaqah with a dimma, short u, following the letter d, and not as the usual mar. Sadaqah is derived from the root sadak, and dower is thus sidak or sadaqah, for it is a token of the truthfulness and earnestness of the affection of the man. Some commentators, like writer of Al-Kashaf 4, have made this point clear. Similarly, according to the opinion of Raghib Isfahani, 5, in his book Mufaradat Garib al-Quran, the obscure words of the Quran, the reason that sadaqah with a fatha, shorta, following the letter d is written saduqa is because it is the sign of sincerity of spiritual faith. Secondly, the pronoun hana, third person feminine plural, in this sentence means that it is ordained that the dower belongs to the woman herself and not to her father or mother. Dower is not the wages for having brought her up, nursed her, and fed her. Thirdly, the word nihilatan, willingly, spontaneously, and not reluctantly, makes it complete clear that the dower has no other purpose apart from being an offer, a present, or a gift. 6. Two kinds of sentiments in animals. This is not especially the case just for human beings. In all animals who are divided into two sexes, because this is needed for completeness, the male is born needier, that is, his feelings are more in need of the female than vice versa. This is the reason that, at the time of their mating, the male takes many steps to attract the female and make her accept. It is also instrumental in balancing the relations of the two sexes, so that the male does not misuse his strength, and so that he keeps an attitude of humility and meekness. 7. Presents and gifts in illicit relations. Presents are not confined to marriage and the legal relation of wife and husband. When a man and a woman want to take pleasure from each other against the divine law, and want, as it is called, free love, even that, it is the man who gives presents to the woman. If they incidentally spend money on coffee, tea, or food, the man knows that it is his function to pay the bill. Woman considers it a sort of insult for her to have to pay for man. For a young man, having a good time requires money and financial resources, and, for a young girl, it is a source of getting presents. These habits prevail even in unlawful relationships, and the root cause of this is the different natures of the feelings of women and men towards each other. 8. European love affairs are more natural than their marriages. In the Western world, where, in the name of the equality of human rights, they have altered family rights from their natural form, and have tried, despite the law of nature, to put man and woman in the same situation, and leave them to act out the same roles and to perform the same duties in the family, still, when free love, as it is called, appears, and the laws of the land do not change man and woman from their natural course, man performs the same function, which is natural to him, of seeking, requesting, giving something of value, and spending money. Man presents gifts to the woman, and bears her expenses, in spite of the fact that in European marriage there is nothing like a dower, and, as for maintenance, the burdensome responsibility is left to the lot of the woman. It means that European love affairs are more in agreement with nature than European marriages. The dower is one piece of evidence which leads to the conclusion that woman and man are created with different aptitudes, and that the law of creation has bestowed upon them different attributes, according to their natural and innate rights.